Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Tracy Metz, and I'm the director of the John Adams. This is one of several events around the upcoming elections that we're organizing together with the Rode Hoed. And a special word of thanks to our partners at the Rode Hoed, working with Ayaan Aboukar. It is such a pleasure. It's so easy. It's so happy working towards the same thing with people who are dedicated to making special events happen. So thank you, Ayaan, and we're delighted to be here. You don't need me to tell you that today is an important day. It's Super Tuesday, the high point of the primaries that are being held today in 16 states. Not that there's much surprise about the candidates, although this is Nikki Haley's last chance to challenge Donald Trump for the Republican nomination. I say, don't hold your breath. Nevertheless, Super Tuesday is a milestone every 4 years in the Byzantine process of American presidential elections. So, no better moment to talk about the direction U.S. politics is headed. That is what Kenneth Manusama's book is about, called Democratie van het Wilde Westen, Democracy of the Wilde West, with a subtitle, Rights, Racism, and Religion, A Democracy Under Pressure, published in Dutch by Bots Publishers. And Evert and Manon, the founders of Bots, are here this evening. So congratulations on this extremely successful project already. Kenneth is an expert on the US Constitution and the legal aspects of American politics. He's also the host of the podcast Amerikaanse Toestanden. You might be thinking, hey, this guy sounds pretty Dutch. Yes, he is. It is not often that we welcome Dutch speakers, actually more like never. But this book is so spot on that we were eager to invite him. So he sort of snuck in the back door, right, Kenneth? In his book, he shows that the problems in American democracy did not start with Trump, nor did they end with his defeat in 2020, nor were they unique in American history. This is a long tale. A word about this evening's program. Kenneth will give a talk, followed by a conversation with our moderator of this evening, Sophie Derksen. We're delighted to have you here, Sophie, whom you may know from the VPRO program Bureau Buitenland. They will be joined by Marco Valenta, president of the Netherlands American Studies Association and assistant professor at University College in Utrecht, and Manon Portos Minetti, historian, lecturer, curator, specializing in colonial violence in the Americas and the Caribbean. We'll close the evening with a sneak preview of Boom Chicago's new show, Politically Incorrect, featuring Greg Shapiro and Pep Rosenfeld. And not only are we really happy to have them with us, but I think there couldn't be a better moment to end an evening like this with a laugh. Just some practicalities. There will not be a regular book signing this time, but if you buy a copy, and we hope you will, Kenneth will be more than happy to sign it, and I made sure that he does have a pen in his inner pocket. Before I hand the floor over to Kenneth, just a quick reminder that the John Adams offerings this month are particularly rich. On March 18th, we welcome Emily Hunt to talk about authenticity and the influencer industry. And on March 28th, Jennifer Carlson with moderator Bas Blokker, whom you may know is the previous America correspondent of NRC, will tell about her foray into the world of gun sellers in America and her book, Merchants of the Right. So, you know by now, never a dull moment at the John Adams. Kenneth, over to you.
Once upon a time, as the saying goes, an angry mob tried to overrun the Capitol in Washington, D.C. in order to prevent the confirmation and certification of a presidential election 3 months earlier. Rumors had been swirling around the country that something like this may happen. Former officials hinted at it, and fears of possible insurrection had been reported in the newspapers. The day was February 13th, 1861, and Abraham Lincoln was slated to become president of the United States on March 4th, 163 years ago yesterday. However, as opposed to January 6, 2021, the the federal government was prepared, and soldiers were able to prevent the insurrectionists from entering the building. But February 13th and January 6th have one important thing in common. The would-be insurrectionists tried to thwart progress towards the fulfillment of the foundational yet false promise of America. This Super Tuesday, the question is whether progress continues or not. Now, politicians know, or should know, that making promises is dangerous. In 1776, an enlightened, yet slave-holding aristocrat from Virginia, Thomas Jefferson, made a promise he either did not mean literally, or just did not know how to fulfill. It was Jefferson who wrote these famous words that most of us know into the American Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is America's promise of equality, but as I said, a false one at that. Nevertheless, it opened a Pandora's box of false expectations. Fulfilling this promise has been a struggle ever since for poor white men, enslaved black people, indigenous Americans, new immigrants, and women, in that order. Reckoning with and repenting for the past is America's fate. But here's the main point of my book. In opposing the fulfillment of the false promise of equality, American democracy and the rule of law have been repeatedly endangered and even sacrificed by those willing to exploit structural constitutional vulnerabilities in the American political system under the guise of religion and in pursuit of an illusory self-image. Their practical goal? To maintain or establish a permanent minority government to perpetuate their own dominant position, the dominant position of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men. So when it comes to what we have seen during the presidency of Donald Trump, January 6th, and the behavior of the Republican Party, we can quote Taylor Swift. I think I've seen this film before. And if we go on our own sweeping Eras tour, we can see how constitutional law, courts, religious militancy, and racial oppression all come together to frustrate the fulfillment of the promise of equality, fueled by industrialization and technological developments, secularization, demographic change, and the growth of the federal power of the federal government. Now, after the optimism of the Declaration of Independence of 1776, the adoption of the Constitution in 1789 dashed many hopes as it continued slavery and even enhanced the power of slave-holding states in the federal governmental structures. In the early 19th century, a religious fervor would inspire those who wanted to abolish slavery, but it also inspired the notion of manifest destiny, the idea that the new Americans were meant to conquer, colonize, and civilize the entire continent, but in the process committing a slow genocide of the original Americans and spreading and enlarging the enslaved population. The US Supreme Court declared black people, and I quote, so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. End quote. States, old and new, were free to exclude newly arrived European immigrants from participating in political life, especially if you were Irish and/or of the Catholic faith. Yet both the moral resistance to slavery and the religious justification for it kept increasing, which of course ultimately resulted in the Civil War of the 1860s. But new optimism was found after 1865, after the Civil War, when the so-called Reconstruction Amendments abolished slavery, granted citizenship to all, and outlawed racial discrimination in voting. After enslavement, constitutional equality had finally arrived. The federal government tried to enforce it, but became distracted with exploring the Wild West instead of securing equality in the South. Terror rained down on the formerly enslaved from the likes of the Ku Klux Klan and ordinary white citizens. Not before long, the system of Jim Crow was established, marginalizing black people in the South, but also Mexican Americans and Asian immigrants in the West. Voting and economic advancement was almost made impossible. And segregation of the races was sanctioned by the US Supreme Court in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson with the term separate but equal. Fundamentalist Christian evangelicals found their voice when resisting the social progress in the early 20th century, while the Ku Klux Klan marched in the streets of Washington, D.C. in the 1920s, and America First became a popular slogan. But America First was not only a call to keep America from the world, but to keep the world from America. It was not only America First, but Americans first. With ever-flowing migration from around the world, the question for some was, and still is, who is to be included in the term American? During World War II, the hypocrisy of fighting equality abroad while perpetuating inequality at home became too much for many Americans. So a new birth of optimism came when the US Supreme Court decided finally to advance instead of obstruct the promise of equality. Separate but equal was relegated to the dustbin of history in Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, which further inspired the Civil Rights Movement and resulted in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. After enslavement, after constitutional equality, the protection and actual advancement of equality had arrived. But in the context of the Cold War, fears of communism and this uprooting of the social order had sparked another religious awakening with pleas to subject oneself to Jesus. Politically, groups like the John Birch Society advocated extremism to combat those fears. A broad conservative movement, particularly motivated by religion, started to arise and was harnessed in the Republican Party by Richard Nixon through to Ronald Reagan. On the surface, a colorblind society was the new goal, but the war on drugs became the new Jim Crow. The improbable election of Barack Obama in 2008 is the latest moment of optimism. From enslavement, constitutional equality, and legal protection, to equal participation and equal opportunity. And Obama sparked a now familiar backlash that Americans are still experiencing today. But in this era, our current era, there is something fundamentally different, giving rise to fundamentally different kinds of resistance. As the Tea Party ratcheted up the rhetoric against Obama, the Black Lives Matter movement erupted on the scene. Why? Because after Obama's election finally promised equal participation and opportunity, the heirs of the enslaved are now demanding their equal position and equal treatment in society at large. And rightfully so. And a fundamental shift in demographics, the growth of non-white minorities, is about to overtake the historically dominant white part of the American population. And I would uncontroversially argue that those pressures explain the rise of Trump's Make America Great movement, as much as it is desperate and ultimately futile. And that people now openly talk about and openly adhere to white Christian nationalist ideas is an ominous sign. On the battlefield of politics, the US Supreme Court has also placed its thumb on the scale by steadily eroding the legal protections adopted in the 1960s. Everyone should know the case of Shelby County versus Holder from the Supreme Court and the consequences of that decision. So what is it that MAGA is pursuing? Is it going back to the 1950s? The 1850s, perhaps? I would argue that already Ronald Reagan's borrowed image of a city on a hill harkens back to the old frontier and the Wild West of the late 1800s, a democracy of the Wild West. but not the real Wild West, but as it is portrayed in the 1940s and 1950s Western movies of cowboys and Indians. An America that has never been, in which non-white minorities and women know their place, and LGBTQ people do not exist, in which local government is scant, the federal government far away, where everyone fends for themselves, and an America in which the fear of God resides in everything and everybody. Now, I have talked at length about why American democracy has struggled, but half of the book is also about how democracy could be allowed to struggle. And there are three structural features in the American system of government that imperil its democratic character. First, its federal structure, with each state having 2 seats in the Senate, irrespective of population, makes it unrepresentative of the American populace, having also its effects on the Electoral College through which presidents are elected. I am sure this audience is familiar with it. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, according to the Constitution, the time, place, and manner of all elections, federal and local, are determined by each state itself. A majority in the state legislature becomes the political crown jewel. Voter suppression, in all its forms to this day, is locally driven. And although authorized by the Constitution, the federal government has been unable and unwilling to place parameters on local election laws. Third, the office of the president is itself a clear liability. Written into the Constitution with the virtuous father of the nation, George Washington, in mind, the presidency consists of few clear boundaries. It is surrounded by unwritten, almost unenforceable norms like transparency, good faith, service, acting in the public interest. Only the ballot box and maybe impeachment by Congress are hard checks on the American president. And as I mentioned in the book a few times, enter Donald Trump. And Donald Trump brings us to another vulnerability of American democracy, and that is democracy itself. I've gotten some criticisms the last couple of years, and of course on social media, about being so anti-Trump. I guess I am. But I'd rather formulate it as me being pro-democracy and pro-rule of law. If anything, democracy is only as good as those who use it. And we all do. Citizens, politicians, civil servants, lawyers, judges. Because democracy and the rule of law depend on the good faith of a substantial majority of all these actors. If only a minority is of such good faith, you open the door to a movement that is able to capture an entire political party, that dances to the tune of its unscrupulous leader, whose carelessness and recklessness with the democracy with which they are entrusted endangers the nation. And as the great American judge Learned Hand wrote, liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can even do much to help it. There is no mistaking that the MAGA movement is marching towards authoritarianism. Its plans can be found online. Just Google Project 2025 or Agenda 47. In their pursuit of democracy of the Wild West, MAGA is willing to break democracy by executing the authoritarian playbook. Mass deportations of predominantly non-white immigrants, prosecuting political opponents, deploying the military within the United States to quell unrest, install political loyalists throughout the bureaucracy, and using that bureaucracy to stifle dissent within and outside of government, using federal law enforcement to do the same, on the basis of, for instance, the Alien Enemies Act, stifle reproductive and LGBTQ+ rights, and ultimately refusing to leave office after losing an election. All of that in order to establish a democracy of the Wild West. On this Super Tuesday, the stakes for Election Day in November could not be clearer. But let me end on a less gloomy note. and thank the John Adams Institute for having me, making this exception, having a Dutch author talk about a book written in Dutch. So thank you, Tracy, Ian, Mika, where you guys are. And of course, the Rode Hoed for hosting, in particular, Ayaan Abukar. The very first line in the book talks of a good friend who told me I was born in the wrong country. She has been my informal editor and first critic, but also a great cheerleader in my writing journey, so thank you, Alba. But most of all, when it comes to the process of writing the book, I of course have to thank my wife and kids for enduring that process of long days and nights away in my office and tolerating my bad moods. Thank you all so much again, and I very much look forward to having a great discussion with Marka and Manon and answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. Wherever you want, it's your night.
I'll come close.
Oh yes, very cozy. Good night. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you for your introductory remarks. A gloomy tale, as you've called it. Congratulations with your book. The book we're celebrating here tonight. Super Tuesday is not really living up to its name this year, but for you, I assume this is a Super Tuesday, being ready with your book.
Finally, we're finally here, yes.
How do you feel after finishing?
I've been told it's like birth. I can't say that
Well,
I've
it's a
experienced
very
that.
dangerous
I know.
comparison.
I hoped I prefaced that accordingly. But it's been a very intense year, so I have to thank my family for keeping up with me.
What was your most intense moment? Family's present, so we can check.
My most intense moment, there were many, but that's probably having to wake up early, working late until 2 o'clock at night because you can't stop. There have been several of these very tense moments.
I was wondering, because you said it's quite a gloomy tale. What was your predominant emotion whilst writing the book?
The predominant emotion is one of discovery. As I say in the book, I've been studying, I guess, America for a long time. And only after the past 10 years, I have burst my own bubble as to what America is about. And this book is a journey of discovery for me as well. And even though it is indeed a gloomy tale, I nevertheless keep my fascination and love for the United States. And as I've said elsewhere, love is irrational, so there you go.
But if you say it was a discovery, what's the biggest discovery that you came across with?
The biggest, that's a good one. The biggest discovery was indeed that everything that I knew intellectually, first of all, was true, but hit me emotionally when I discovered the depth of it all. When that I mean the depth of the anti-immigrant rhetoric and actions that Americans have taken in the past, and of course the depth of the ill treatment of minorities in general in America. So everything that I thought America stood for, the picture that it presented, the myths that it espouses in the world, are exactly that, myths. And
it hit a nerve.
It hit a nerve, but then again, it made my fascination only grow deeper. Maybe not fonder, but deeper.
But I'm a journalist, so I hope you permit me that I dive a bit deeper. But why did it hit a nerve with you?
It was a little bit disappointing, and it kind of clicked with the experiences that I've had in our latest period when we lived in New York from 2000 to 2020, when Donald Trump had been elected, had been inaugurated, and in the run-up to our move to New York, I discovered that I am a person of color, and that a person of color in the United States under Donald Trump is operating in a society that is not always friendly to people of color. We were in the bubble of New York City, but as soon as you leave the city, leave the state, you travel throughout the country. I became even more aware of my own biracial history than I ever was in the Netherlands. And even because of my experiences and the feeling that I've had in the United States, I am more in tune with my own background when I'm here in the Netherlands. So the discovery journey in the book also made me realize and be critical of Dutch society as well.
We'll get to that point. Let's stay in the States for this moment. In your book, and I quote, you write that many people you come across still underestimate the danger that Trump and the MAGA movement pose to democracy. How come? How come the people still underestimate it, in your opinion?
I think we probably all know this. Americans are indoctrinated with this image of themselves. Even the most critical American will, at one point, end the discussion by saying, "But America is still the greatest country in the world." So the myth of America as this promised land, land of the free, home of the brave, goes from left to right on the political spectrum. And I think they need to burst their own bubble very soon, because otherwise they will not see what certain groups within the United States are trying to achieve, and the obstacles that are still in the way for all kinds of minorities.
It's a central point in your book, the opposition against those who strive to fulfill this American promise of equality is stronger and more violent than ever. We'll get to that future, but maybe first dive a little bit into that historical promise of equality, a false promise, as you call it quite firmly in your book. It was Jefferson who made the promise. He either did not mean or just did not know how to fulfill it, as you just put. Which one of the two is it? And does it still matter?
I have a fondness for the founding fathers because of their complexity. Thomas Jefferson, indeed, he was on the one hand enlightened, seen as a Renaissance man, but of course he held slaves. He had brutal affairs with his slaves. Sally Hemings is, of course, a name that a lot of people will know. But then again, when you see what he was writing, he tried to tackle the issue of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but others wouldn't let him. You see George Washington's writings. He also exhibits a lot of unease with the concept of slavery, yet he kept slaves his whole life. So I think up until perhaps now, in certain parts of the United States, the white population does not know how to live together with non-white minorities. There's this constant unease. And of course, if you have been in such a dominant position the whole time, it's for centuries long, and it's steadily being chipped away at, the unease grows, and there is nothing more human than racism. So that is why that still persists. Racism still persists. The unease still persists. So to say that the founders were wrong, were bad,
is an uneasy conclusion.
I don't share that conclusion, because I think they were very human, and they recognized the complexity, and they just didn't have the imagination, I guess, to say, well, we can live together with non-white minorities. Remind you, this is the late 18th century.
Yes.
And so I'm going to give them a little bit credit. And I think throughout Europe, that time, we would have felt the same way.
Still, you say this promise of equality opens a Pandora's box full of false expectations. The goal was always, as you write, to establish a permanent minority government to perpetuate the dominant position of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men. Can you elaborate a bit more on how religion was used as a disguise?
Well, you got to start even all the way back to not even 16. There's this book. The name escapes me right now, but it says that 1690 is a pivotal year. 1690, not 1619, when the first enslaved arrived in the United States, or in America, but 1690, when there was as part of a religious awakening, part of a political play to distinguish between poor white men and black people who were starting to complain about their situation. They started to racialize black people. Before that, it was not so much racism, but they started to racialize black people on the basis of the Bible. They pointed towards certain passages arguing for the inferiority of black people. So that's kind of where it started, I guess. And you see that throughout history. If you see the run-up to the Civil War, the perpetuation of slavery in the South, the slaveholders in the South were starting to, again, coming up with biblical quotations and say, black people have always been inferior. They're doomed to be enslaved. Can you believe that? Every time when the promise of equality is on the brink of being fulfilled, religious fervor also rises. And we see that right now. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is a almost not closeted white Christian nationalist. If you look at his background, it's clear that he's a white Christian nationalist. We get to that concept later on, but and that is because, again, the religious fervor that we see. Talk to a lot of die-hard Trump supporters. They'll go like, just go look at your Bible and you'll see what you need to do. Because, as I mentioned in my talk just now, the Black Lives Matter period, so to speak, means that non-white minorities are basically fed up and are demanding their place in society. And as a reaction to that, we see again a rise in religious fervor to say, no, it's ordained by our religion. Now, mind you, it's not religion at large, but it is a subset of religion, or a subgroup that is using religion to make their argument. They don't want to say, they don't want to be openly racist. They'll use religion to say, well, look at the Bible, that's where it is, that's what you need to do. And the result would be, again, the subjugation of non-white minorities.
I think it's a good moment to invite on stage Marco Valenta and Manon Portes-Manetti. Please join us here. Thank you. Yeah, we have a president in the room, ladies and gentlemen. Marco Valenta, president of the Netherlands Association of American Studies and assistant professor at the University College in Utrecht, as it was mentioned by Tracy. Marco, welcome. With you, we'll further zoom in on the role of religion in this electoral battlefield, as just already opened by Kenneth. And historian Manon Portes-Manetti, welcome as well. You will help us delve more into the complexities of race in the upcoming elections, because for this part of the talk, we'll try to shift a bit more towards the future. Welcome to both of you, Mark and Manon. I'd like to explore your personal involvement with the issues Kenneth has been addressing in his book, so we have an impression of the lenses through which you have read it, as you both did. I assume, yes, you did. You did your homework. Mark, I was curious, what was your predominant emotion whilst reading the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think my experience was, coming from the United States, it's maybe a bit different in the sense that, you grew up in the midst of it. So the U.S., it's a very dynamic society. It's very creative. It's also very violent. And when you're in the U.S., in my experience, right, that's something both that you're surrounded with and that you also have to be aware of, and that at the same time you take for granted. Yeah, so it wouldn't hit me, with the same kind of emotional impact, I think, as when you've, come to the U.S. from outside with a certain kind of set of images and fantasies, and then, have a sense of, and even when you know about the violence, it's of course different if you feel it and you immerse yourself in it. So I think in that sense, right, it's a different thing. And then it's very recognizable. I mean, I think it's central to the U.S. is the fight between, the aspiration to equality. And I think that's very fundamental. It's very meaningful. It's a profound aspiration, and it's something that, also has shaped me very deeply. And in part because of, how often and to what extent that's not met and that's violated. That being said, I think that conflict is something that's taking place everywhere. We haven't achieved equality anywhere.
No, but you said I wasn't maybe that shocked, but would you share the concern that Kenneth has raised about the current state of American democracy?
Yeah, so I go back and forth. Say, if you've got the academic me, then I think analytically, and I'm thinking about American democracy in the context of there's a general pressure far beyond the United States also on democracy. And so, as an academic, what I want to understand is what the relationship is between those different kinds of pressures. We see it here in the Netherlands. We see it in many, many different kinds of places. You see it in India. You see it in different countries across Europe and so forth.
Of course.
So that's the analytic part.
And then the personal one?
I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And so I'm figuring out, I'm talking with people. What do we do about that?
And do you have an answer already?
Well, that's the next lecture. That's the next, John.
We'll get there. Manon Portes-Manetti, as an historian, you're specializing in the colonial violence in the Americas and the Caribbean. You have indigenous American ancestors, as you told me, and you've spent the past years decolonizing and reclaiming that identity, as you put it. With that experience, what struck you in the book?
I think what Kenneth says about things repeating themselves. A while ago, I heard someone say time is a flat circle. And also as a historian, that is something that, you don't always want to look for patterns, but you also don't want to think everything is always getting better or getting worse. So you're always navigating towards those spaces. And I think, the promise of equality as someone with indigenous ancestry is interesting, to say the least. In a sense of we're talking about, these people talking about equal rights when they're colonizing and dehumanizing people. And when we go to slavery, it's stolen people on stolen land. And now with the migration crisis, we're talking about how can someone be illegal on stolen land. And that is what, in a sense, I always come back to. If you're looking at the US, it's still being colonized. And there's still people not being recognized as citizens or as... people who are part of the land as well. So I think reading the book, I always think America existed before 1492. So that's why I was reading that into it and making those lines, going back and forth in that sense.
And what what was the effect that it had on you, seeing this time as a flat circle?
Disappointed but not surprised. I think that is a good way to put it. Also what Marka just said right now, what Kenneth, these sentiments of it has to get worse before it gets better. Personally, I am a pessimist, so I'm not sure if it's gonna get better. If you know the history of indigenous people in the Americas, then what is better?
Kenneth obviously describes this American history, this time as a flat circle, as a constant battle between all those groups striving for greater equality and a counter movement that opposes this strive, right? That's the back and forth that we see. I was just curious, diving a bit more into this theme of religion. Within the current MAGA movement, many conservative forces come together, as you put it. What are its main blood groups? There's a chapter in the book that I found very interesting. Can you just give us a brief overview on what's the role of religion there? And then I get to you, Marka.
Well, let me. If we look, for instance, to the Ku Klux Klan, we all know these images of burning crosses. They're very openly claiming that they're fighting for the white Protestant race. The John Birch Society was very conservative. It also already got going in the 1940s, but really got busy in the 1950s and 60s. It had a religious aspect to it. At first, also very suspicious of Catholicism. So it was, if you want to say, not all religion, but a subset of religion, and I mentioned Protestantism for a reason. It was, first of all, very Protestant, as its one of the main drivers. I think one of the most recent episodes that started optimistic, but the conservative movement of the 70s and 80s under Ronald Reagan was very much driven by the Christian right, as a reaction to all the societal upheaval of the 1960s, as well as, of course, Roe versus Wade, giving abortion rights to women, which has recently been taken away as part of this counter-reaction. Religion is always there as an excuse, because after constitutional equality was achieved, one could not openly say these groups, these non-white groups, are inferior or not equal. And they started to craft this image of their perfect America, and the perfect democracy, and that is the democracy of the Wilde West, wherein white Protestant or white religious Christian people dominated, and I always say where the social and racial hierarchy was clear, namely under domination of the white Christian people. And you see that even when they say, well, we need to have a colorblind society, they say, well, ever since the Reconstruction Amendments, ever since the Brown versus Education, we need to have a colorblind society where everybody is equal. But the reality is, they want to have a Christian nation that dominates other minorities. It is this self-image of the, and I keep going back to John Wayne. That's why John Wayne is a prominent figure towards the end of my the book. Religion. I keep saying. I know I'm repeating myself, but religion keeps being an excuse for saying
it's a fig leaf.
It's a fig
right?
leaf. Yes.
Maybe, if you permit me,
Yes.
to Marke, because Marke, you are working from an intersectional lens, right, as it's called, one of those being religion and religious identity. When we speak about this wide Christian nationalism, you said we have to ask ourselves, how wide is it actually nowadays?
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the things that you have right now that's being looked into, and that is there's an association of Christian nationalism being white Christian nationalism. If you look at who is attracted to Christian nationalism, it actually crosses different racial groups. And there aren't so for three of the main groups, there aren't significant differences. If you look at white Christian nationalists, black Christian nationalists, Hispanic Christian nationalists, it's roughly the same proportions. So there's about, this is very, very rough, but say 10% who are adherents, who are fervent Christian nationalists, another 20% that are interested, supporter, in that. There's another third that are skeptical, another third that reject it. And if you look at Asian Americans, it's about half the number. So instead of 10% being adherents, 5%. But it's very important, there's also black Christian nationalists, there's also Hispanic Christian nationalists, and this is something that sort of goes against what our common sense is.
Yeah, but why is it so important? You say we focus, if I understand you right, on white nationalism, but it's a broader phenomenon. It has roughly equal adherents across races, right, as you explained. Yeah. But what's the consequence of this misunderstanding?
Well, I think because the situation with race in the United States it's changing very quickly, and it's also more complex than than we sometimes think that it is, right? So the fact that, who's standing across from Donald Trump right now? It's Nikki Haley. What does it mean to have a woman of South Asian descent, and a woman, right, be the last, woman standing of all the people that were challenging Donald Trump? If you go back to 2016, right, it was Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. So the Republicans, even with all the kinds of racism and legitimation of racist policies and racist discourse coming out of portions of the Republican Party, is itself diversifying at the same time, right? And then at the same time, if you look at the Democratic Party, on the one hand, very much a supporter of racial diversity, but itself at the same time reproducing all kinds of excluding mechanisms, excluding policies, racist policies. Barack Obama was deporter-in-chief. So he was deporting roughly 400,000 people a year as a way of trying to soften the Republicans to make a deal with him. It didn't work. But so there's these complexities that are embedded if you dig a bit more deeply.
But then maybe coming back to this paradox that conservative Christians gain more political influence while religion, as I understand it, becomes numerically less important.
Right, so you have right now, that's another thing that's really important, is right now you're having a really, really rapid secularization of American society. So I think about 20 years ago, 70% of Americans had a religious affiliation. Today it's under 50%, it's 47%. And so the kind of religious activism that you're seeing and the kinds of the surge in a kind of Christian nationalism is coming in part out of a fear and a reaction to the de-Christianization of American society. At the same time, say for African American Christian nationalists, it can at moments give them an access to an American, right? I'm a real American. It gives you an access to a kind of entryway into being a full American. The same goes for Hispanic Christian nationalists.
Yeah. Kenneth, you want to dive in?
Well, it goes into the image, your very last point, the image of the United States as a Christian nation. And if minorities only adhere to that religion, they feel themselves American, right? So they're buying into the image of the United States as a Christian nation. So if only we are as Christian as other groups in the United States, we become part of that image. And this is where, at the very eventually, Christian nationalism ends up being white Christian nationalists, because they'll at one point exclude these minorities, and I'm afraid that the non-white minorities will see what the use of religion is actually for.
Yeah, well, because the thing is, the irony is that in fact the minorities in part they join in. Right? So black Christian nationalists will be, like white Christian nationalists, will be very anti-immigrant. Mm-hmm. They will be not anti-minority, but they will be anti-immigrant. Sure. At the same time, Hispanic Christian nationalists will be more pro-immigrant than their fellow white Christian nationalists, but they will be at the same time anti-minority. So it's a little bit, it'll sound a little bit academic, I think, but just to get the sense of the complexity and how mixed up it is. And then one final point I think is really important, and that's where I think a little bit, or put a different emphasis, I think, than Kenneth, is that Christianity and religion have also been really, really important for claiming equality and for resisting oppression, right? So the Black Church, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. So religion has been a very powerful force also for challenging those things. And I think what you're going to see happen, because the US is secularizing, is both in terms of progressives and conservatives, that it will become increasingly secular. Increasingly secular,
right,
less religious. But historically, right, religion has also been a very powerful force for challenging exclusion, racism, discrimination.
Yeah, part of religion as being a motor of social progress. You see a different form of religion that says, well, it shouldn't be this motor of social progress. Religion should be found in yourself. I mentioned the Puritans and the Pilgrims in the book. The premillennialists and the postmillennialists, great sounding terms. But but one says we need to do good works here on earth, the others say, well, we just need to adhere to whatever is said in the Bible and give ourselves to Jesus and everything will be fine. It will be the second coming of Christ. One is quite conservative, the other one is quite progressive in the sense that it says, well, we need to do good works here on earth to make our society here more perfect, I guess, so Christ will come, second coming of Christ or so. So there are two different approaches, and this fundamentalist strain was also a reaction to the social progress strain at the beginning of the 20th century. So you're right that these two are two different sides to the religion in the United States, but we're seeing the more fundamentalist strain right now.
I want to hop on to what you write in the last two chapters about the religious rights and their take on family values, for example. That it also means anti-queer policy, for example. Manon, what are your main concerns when it comes to this part of the agenda?
Where do I begin? Where do I end? I think it's very hard right now to be in certain places in the US. I think it was last week in Alabama, the IVF ruling. It's unsafe to be queer in certain places. I think Florida, I think everyone here in the news has seen it as well. And yeah, this is getting rolled back, even though it was never really established. I think what is hard, and I think Kenneth as an expert can tell more about that with constitutional rights and laws, a lot of things in the US different than here, right? We have our rights here, it's in the grondwet, the constitution here. In the US that's not that easily done, or it can be interpreted differently depending on what kind of judge is sitting there, what the ruling is, and I think that is definitely getting harder, and you see more people also wanting to leave the US because it's getting harder to be queer. People are dying because of these policies. People are getting killed, and that is also getting normalized. There's a lot of those developments going on. It is a very dark tale indeed. Definitely. I would actually suggest that we, very conscious of time, that we shift towards what is then at stake at the upcoming elections, and I'll also make some time for you in the audience to pose your questions. As you mentioned also in your talk about religious voters, Trump is appealing to an increasing proportion of minority voters, as you call them. Can you briefly elaborate on how do you explain that?
Well, because I think people are seeing things from, so for example, if you're thinking intersectionally, right? So among Hispanic voters, for example, there's a portion of Hispanic voters that is either evangelical or Catholic that has very, will have the kinds of family values that are associated with the Republican Party. A portion of them also, there's also a variety of racial identities among sort of this large Hispanic population. So some of them will be thinking of themselves very much as white. Others are thinking of themselves very much as non-white. You know, a portion, so for example, depending on what country they come from, so for example, Cuban refugees who were fleeing from Castro have a very strong association of Republicans as the ones who embrace them and who protect them and who will challenge communism. You have the same among, for example, some Vietnamese groups who also were fleeing from communism and think that Republicans will, you know, are the ones who really will stand up for them and stand up for the values they stand for. Others who are very drawn to notions of sort of entrepreneurialism. There shouldn't be free handouts. People should work hard. People should have traditional values, be able to pull their own weight. So there's a set of values. There's a set of specific historical developments. There's a set of religious and racial identities. And those explain the complexity of the ways in which people end up voting. They don't vote simply along one line, but decide which part of their experience, in fact, is the one that's going to be most meaningful to them at the moment that they vote.
And grand question then, of course, being, will Biden be able to reconnect with this part of the electorate?
Well, yeah, so both the Democrats and the Republicans are, say, umbrella organizations. So they have many different communities, many different kinds of also political convictions that either tend more progressive or tend more conservative. The last time Biden was able to mobilize, that he pulled it off. So he mobilized many different kinds of constituencies. And it looks like this time part of the reason that he's polling less well than Trump is because a number of those constituencies are less excited about him. So you see that the youth is less excited, you see that people farther on the left are less excited, you see that people who are concerned about the slaughter in Gaza are less excited and actively talking about not voting for Biden. And you also see that people are very concerned about his age. So right now, the situation isn't looking great, but we've got about another few months.
Maybe as a final little chapter before we get to the audience, maybe zoom in on, let's say, the escalation potential, Kenneth, upwards to November 24. You put it in the book, you put the question, will this false promise of equality again be obstructed, as you raised? You say there's reason for optimism in the book. You quote Martin Luther King, the Arch of Universe tends towards justice, but at the same time, the resistance every time gets more violent on both sides, also important to mention. So what do you think? I mean, is it really heading in the direction that we see displayed here?
Well, I think that there is reason for optimism. I'm more of an optimist. Namely that, and Marco mentioned the young voters and youth voters and, of course, minority voters, especially young voters of color, do not buy anymore into that image of America that we see portrayed here, that image of democracy of the Wild West. That means that they are not going to settle as quickly or at least will not be as afraid to confront a person like Donald Trump. I'm actually an optimist and say, well, they'll make the calculation in the end and say, well, wait a minute, if Donald Trump gets to be president again, we're going to go back to that myth that I don't believe in anymore. So while it's going to be a numbers game, I totally get that. I see why the Israel-Palestine question is big right now, and it is my hope, and that's why my talk was a little gloomy, I guess, that in the end, just like in 2020, just like in 2022, that the democracy argument is going to win out. But
in what sense?
In the sense that most people, a majority of people, will be convinced, indeed, if we elect Donald Trump again, we're going to regress as a nation instead of progress towards the fulfillment of the promise of equality. But that would take an effort because the reality of politics, of course, in elections is mainly turnout. There are a myriad of factors that are at play in this election. Economy, Israel, Palestine, LGBTQ rights, etc. These must all be harnessed by the Democratic Party and confront Donald Trump and that extreme conservative wing of the Republican Party.
Any reactions? Reason
go ahead.
For optimism?
Yeah, sorry. No, I think it's hard, and I think it's. I don't believe the same thing as you. I think a lot of people see what we would maybe say is regressive as progressive, and that turnout is way more, activated. It's way more there. People feel, because they feel maybe pessimistic, I won't go out to vote. My rights are not being heard anyways. The system doesn't work, but they don't know any other way to just do nothing, or thinking not doing anything will raise my voice. That are the sounds I've been hearing.
But a certain apathic posture, is that what you mean?
Yeah. For example, I know people from California who are like, well, I'm going to vote, but it doesn't even matter because
they are going to vote.
They are going to vote. They are Democratic, but they feel like it doesn't matter because it's going to be Democratic anyways, which in a way you would think that's nice because it's going to be a Democratic vote if that is for your political, what you're leaning towards. But that feeling that it doesn't even matter if you vote or not, even if it's a vote you want to make or do what the right word is, that is showing me that people don't really trust in democracy, or they don't see why it is important, and that those are people that are young as well. Yeah.
On that point, Marke, final thought.
Well, I think what strikes me when is that people on the right, people who are Trump supporters, also feel very, very strongly that democracy is at stake, and I think that's something that sort of. When I listen to the kinds of things people are saying, there is a very strong sense of crisis at sort of both ends of the spectrum, and you hear from both sides sort of this sense of democracy being at stake. That being said, I know which end of the spectrum I'm at, and I don't think that there's any quick solutions, and the reason that there's no quick solutions is that there's tremendous inequality in the United States. Another reason is that now I'm stuck. I've got 50 million reasons in my head. But I think it's when I have two things that are happening in my circles. If I go to New York, people are actually asking about should we even vote in my circles. Meanwhile,
your circles being more tending towards Democrat.
Progressive academic. Mm-hmm. So in progressive academic New York, I think there's a lot of question about should we even vote. There's a sense of tremendous letdown in terms of what Biden has been doing. I think it also really, really matters if you're looking domestically or you're looking internationally, and the international rule of law, and so forth and so forth. And then, meanwhile, I've got my aged aunt and uncle very fervently, energetically sending mails to the group, group apps and group mail. Vote for Biden. He might be an old fogey, but look at what he's done. Our democracy is at stake. So I'm getting it from both ends, and we'll see what happens.
Democracy is only as good as those who use it, if I may quote Kenneth. I'd suggest that we use the last 10 minutes for questions from the audience. That there definitely will be there, I guess. Yes, it's quite dark, so I can't really see. Someone in the middle? Yes. Please, very briefly, pose your question.
Thank you for a great talk. I just wanted to make one comment about religion. I agree with everything that everybody said on the stage about it, but there's one more function that it plays, the very important one in the MAGA movement that I'd like to mention, and that is there's a highly anti-intellectual tendency in the United States right now, and a lot of people are undereducated, and they know that they are, and they have a deep resentment of the really educated, the intellectuals, and in a way, the Obamas and the Clintons, who actually were the best people around for lower-class Americans, have now become a symbol of this intellectualism, elitism, and they need to deal with this inferiority somehow, so they have to demonize it. And what better way to demonize it than to use a religion that denies history, science, and facts?
A religious anti-intellectualism is what
absolutely. Well, no, they use religion to demonize intellectualism.
Okay, just a remark, no question. Good, no, very, very welcome as well. Thank you. Questions, other questions? We prefer questions, though, I'd say. Yes, one in the back, please. Yes. And maybe I'll just see, what do we have more? There's one, yes. We need you as well, yes.
I was wondering, how should I interpret Trump and the MAGA movement? Are they a fascist movement, national socialist movement? How should I interpret it?
You want to have labels? Yes, okay, good. No,
okay.
Kenneth, well, actually, I wrote it down. Kenneth is very explicit about it. Where is it? I have it here. What do you write again? I wrote it down. Yes, you said no mistaking, and actually I think you said it tonight as well. The MAGA movement is marching towards authoritarianism. I'd also want to know how explicit is that then? And of course, zipping that question in with the other one.
I think like any authoritarian movement, the MAGA movement is claiming that it is democratic and that it's getting through its authoritarian measures through democratic means. That's why I call also the presidency as being one of those vulnerabilities. And if you have a captured Congress, then it's easy through democratic means to install authoritarian policies, like the mass deportations. Through executive orders, any president can basically change how the civil service works in the United States, and going even further than removing political appointees, but also a layer of civil servants below that, and install political loyalists there who will do whatever the president says that the president wants. Deploying the military. I mentioned all these acts are available under this democratic, so-called democratic constitution, but it can be deployed for authoritarian means. And if so, then some democratic mechanisms can be basically canceled. You can say, well, you can capture, that's the whole point of the book, not only a minority government, but a permanent minority government can be installed, because through democratic means, through the state legislatures, voting can still be manipulated. We all probably know the term gerrymandering. I mean, voter roll purchase, closing polling stations. These are all measures that are available under the current democratic laws and regulations. But it means that one party, in this case the Republican Party, can install itself and win elections forever. Well, even if there are elections, it's still a one-party state at that point, and it can continue with all those authoritarian measures.
Marke, shortly, yeah, and then I'll get to your question in the back. Yes.
Yeah, just to say about the, I mean, so right, fascism has 50 million definitions.
I want to go there.
One thing you can think about is the historian George Moss, who's written to me very persuasively about it. And what he says is, if you look at fascism, what is at the heart of fascism is the combination of nationalism plus racism, promising national renewal, of national redemption. And I think if you look at those terms in terms of what is it that the aspirations of people who want to vote for Trump are, and what the promises that Trump makes, then he fits that definition of fascism.
Yeah, just to be sure, it's in your book as well. The possibility of actual fascist America is explicitly on the table, is what you write.
Exactly. And the ideology being indeed the image that is the renewal of the nation is indeed going back to that Christian nation dominated by a white minority.
A false myth, as you put it. Yes. Question in the back, if you're still there. Yes.
Thank you for all your contributions, all three of you. I want to ask a question about the finer points of MAGA ideology, if I may. Your concept is that of the democracy of the Wild West. So I'm then thinking about things like Dances with Wolves, you know, like Kevin Costner in a lone outpost. That's the federal government, right, in the 1890s, him with a flag. But if I think about MAGA and Trump, isn't it true that they have absolutely no problem with using the federal government to further their ends? In other words, for him and his coterie, right, the idea is not to have as little government as possible, but to seize the federal government to do its workings for them, right? And that is, to some extent, what sets him apart from, let's say, old guard Republicans who think about business first, government as the problem, not the solution.
Thanks for your question. Just before we get to the answer, I want to very briefly check in with you. Are there many questions left? Okay, 1, 2, 3, and then we finish. Sorry. Okay, good. Answer, and then we do the 3 last ones. Yes.
I think we're actually in the stage where the MAGA movement indeed needs the federal government to order not only political life, but also the society in general, to form the society that is indeed a democracy of the Wild West. But as I said, it's a democracy of the Wild West, not as it was in reality, but as it is portrayed in the movie. So even that image is a false one. But in the stage before that, in order to establish that, they need the federal government indeed to basically rearrange society. And by rearrange, we often see reduction of rights, minority rights, women's rights, etc.
For the last 5 minutes, I suggest we make a little basket with the 3 final questions that I just allowed. So, can we have the microphone? I guess I pointed here, somewhere in the middle. Yeah, well, someone else. Okay, you're lucky there. Last 4 questions, yes?
I'll be very brief. My question is related to the international impact of these elections. And it's actually 2 questions. The first one is, what do you think?
Make it 1, sorry. Okay. No, otherwise, what do you think? Really running out of time.
The majority of the Americans, do you think the international impact, do they take care of, do they consider this at all? And if they do, what do you think will be the difference between choosing for Biden or choosing for, what was the other one again? Trump.
Very good question. You just opened up a whole PhD in the last 5 minutes, but great question. We'll get to it. The other one here in the middle. I allowed one. No, here in the middle. Yes. Question's gone, I guess. Oh, there's the question.
Still
yes.
there.
Yes. Okay. Do you have any? You wrote this book. Thank you for your story. Do you have an idea what the message should be for the Democrats to get out during the campaign?
Very good one. Oof. Advice for the Democrats. You can think still. And the last one in the middle here. Yes. Help.
Hello. I had a question regarding the Electoral College. To me, it seemed like a very outdated system, which has led to some very unrepresentative situations. And I was wondering, why is that still a system in America, and why cannot be changed to a equal representation?
Okay. Another PhD, yeah, the great one. Let's see, we have, sorry, we'll keep it here because we have the 2 comedians that also have to perform after they've performed here. So, international relations, advice for the Democrats and the Electoral College. 3 questions, who takes which one?
You want to take the international one?
Sure, you go for international relations. Make it brief, please, Marco.
Okay, so international, I think Biden is more predictable than Trump is. So Trump is transactional, opportunistic, unpredictable. At the same time, he will have a huge impact. You saw at certain moments he doesn't hesitate to kill a general, in Iran, or to move the embassy to Jerusalem, or to cozy up to North Korea. So I think both of them will have a big international impact, but Trump's is less predictable.
Thanks, Marco, for that brief one. Electoral College, advice for the Democrats. Who takes what?
I'll take the advice for the Democrats.
You go.
Well, you can do one after me. Maybe you agree with me. Maybe still try to get another candidate.
Very brief, very interesting advice. Then, Kenneth, the Electoral College, that one for you.
So the Electoral College was...
what was the sigh? You made a sigh when the question came up.
Because it's an age-old question, as old as the Electoral College itself. But the Electoral College is there to ensure that, in the beginning at least, the slaveholding states had more power than proportionate to their own population or size. In other words, a vote in Texas, or no, I always take Wyoming, because like 500,000 people live there. A voter in Wyoming has more power through the Electoral College than a voter in, let's say, New York or California. So it's an unequal system, but it's unequal for a reason. There are some who say, well, it's a good system because indeed states like Wyoming or less populated states need to have an equal voice in the United States. But if you go by the principle one person, one vote, then of course it becomes a little bit ridiculous. At the same time, the US Constitution is the most difficult one to amend in the world. So there are some attempts after 2020, even after 2016, let's abolish the Electoral College. Okay, good luck with that. Because you need 2/3 of Congress or 3/5 of the states, and so on. So it's almost a no-go. This is why I sigh, because it's almost an impossible to...
So we remain with the structural deficits that you have identified so clearly in your book.
So the only way is to move population? Yeah, guess not. They've done that already.
And there I'd like to make the final remark again. If anything, democracy is only as good as those who use it. Thank you very much for being here with us, Marco Valenta, Manon Portis-Manetti, and of course, Kenneth Manusama for your book, Democracy of the Wilde West. But it ain't over yet. We will end with a laugh, as Tracy has promised us, and so I hope we do. Pep Rosenfeld and Greg Shapiro are here. They will close the night with 10 to 15 minutes from their new US elections comedy show, Politically Incorrect. Afterwards, you're very welcome for informal chats and drinks and more questions for Kenneth, and he will be there also. Very pleased to sign a copy of the book. Thanks, and first, Pep Rosenfeld and Greg Shapiro. Thank you.
And how about another round of applause for Sophie and the whole panel?
Manusama, buy the book.
Right?
You can buy the book out front. Hi, everybody. I'm Greg.
And I'm Pep. How are you guys doing?
Yay.
I loved Sophie's setup earlier. Enough questions. We have guys making dick jokes.
Yes, we're going to try to put a wonderful, amazing smile on the experience of Super Tuesday. We're here from Boom, Chicago. How many? Yeah.
How many folks have ever seen Boom Chicago before you start?
Yes?
Yeah?
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Oh, welcome back.
And now go crazy if you're seeing people from Boom Chicago for the first time in your life.
That's more. Welcome. This is, we have our own theater mostly, but we're happy to be here at the Rode Hoed. And welcome to...
welcome. Welcome, everyone, to Not So Super Tuesday.
Yeah. We had a global presidential primary at Boom Chicago Theater today, and not so super. 8 years ago, Republicans or Democrats, it was wide open on either side of the ticket. 4 years ago, who could beat Trump? But this year,
this is no Super Tuesday. This is at best this is Clark Kent Tuesday.
Yeah,
today. It's nothing.
Okay,
who cares? Nobody cares.
It's good. We're feeling you guys out here. Good.
If you look at the posters for this event, it says Super Tuesday, the most important day of the primaries, and I had to go, well. Then Christmas is over and nobody got anything.
Oh no! But let us know, how many Dutch people do we have here tonight? Yeah, Dutch people are the ones raising hands and making no noise at all. Good. Yes. Dit is typical Dutch, I believe. How many not Dutch people here do we have? Not Dutch people? Yes, not Dutch people more proud of not being Dutch than Dutch people are proud of being Dutch. Of sorry, nog een keer in het Nederlands. Nederlanders, laat je horen. Daar zijn we. Okay, yes, good.
That was. But let's back up though for the not Dutch people. Let's be specific. Are there any Americans in the house tonight? Americans, make some noise.
Yes. Okay, all right, okay.
What a sad American cheer.
Yeah,
oh, that was so
Tuesday.
sad.
So
oh my gosh!
super.
So Boom Chicago, we're celebrating it. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary last year. When we first got to the Netherlands, when we would say, "Are there any Americans in the house?" Americans would go crazy. Yeah, whoa, we're here, USA, USA. I'm gonna take my dick out. Like it was. But now, y'all are so quiet. Yeah, I don't know. We're sorry. You sound like Germans in 1985. So anyway. Like Sophie said, this fall we are going to be doing a show about the big election. That will be a Super Tuesday.
Super.
I mean, or it will be the worst Tuesday ever.
Super bad.
But we're doing a show and it's called Politically Incorrect, and I think you know what that means.
Yeah, a couple of white guys have an excuse to use the N-word on stage.
That's right. That's right.
No.
We get to be racist and call it edgy.
No, it's not that. No, when we say politically incorrect, we believe we are doing politics incorrectly.
It's true, although we might be doing politics incorrectly, but we do believe that if we're doing our job correctly, then we will offend people on both the left and the right. That's the comedian's
Equal
job.
opportunity offenders.
Exactly.
Although mostly people on the right.
Yeah, way more,
way more,
I think.
So let's dive in.
Yeah, we dive right in, right? Because, I mean, the primary is in session. I mean, nobody is going to be surprised by any of the results. But, you know, there's Joe Biden. He's getting ready for the State of the Union on Thursday, very excited. And, you know, and Donald Trump's out, you know, campaigning for the 2024 election, or as he calls it, you know, Trump 2, the Empire Strikes Back.
Basically, yeah. And now we all get to answer the big questions from political science, such as, can you be president while you're in prison? And I think the answer is yes. I could be like El Chapo, you know. I may run a criminal empire, but it's still an empire, and it's my empire.
By the way,
striking back.
Do folks recognize the voice from the Netherlands second video right there?
That was the one. It was so great. The Netherlands second video, it was true, it was me, it was so great when we said, we know it's going to be America first, but can we just say the Netherlands second? And that's exactly what you did in your last election. Well done, Netherlands.
Yeah, that election, when Geert Wilders and the PVV became the biggest party in the country, I mean, like, it was such shocking news, right? And when I heard it, 99% of me was like, this is awful. This is so terrible. It's bad for the Netherlands. It's bad for Europe. It's bad for the world. But there was 1% of me that had a little bit of Leedvermaak. You know what I mean? A little schadenfreude. There was one part of me that was like, oh, you Dutch people were so smug in 2016. Oh, you stupid Americans. How could you elect an idiot like Donald Trump? How's it feel now, bitches?
Yeah, I got that too.
A little bit.
I got it. A lot of Dutch people were like, oh, yes, we would never vote in the Netherlands. We would never vote for a right-wing, crazy-talking, xenophobic, anti-immigrant populist with crazy blonde hair. And yet, here we are.
Here we are indeed. So these two folks, besides their blonde hairdos, yeah, I think the thing they probably have most in common is they get so much mileage, or if you will, kilometerage, out of their stance on immigration, right? They're both very anti-immigrant, right. Which I think is so weird because, like, Geert Wilders married an immigrant, and Donald Trump married two immigrants.
Right.
Like, how much do they hate their marriages, these guys?
I guess. And why do people think that, you know, if you're like pro-immigration at home, you're also pro-immigration in politics? Like when I'm an immigrant, right? And when my friends from back in America, they ask me, like, what's life like in the Netherlands? Is it affordable? Is there plenty of housing? I tell them, nay, full is full. Stay away. I married an immigrant. Now I'm just like, no, get out. No, anyway. Thought exercise for Dutch people. This might explain the anti-immigrant immigrants, but when you hear, yeah, if you go on a package tour, you visit another country, maybe you go on a boat tour for 2 hours, and you're listening in a foreign language. Of course, you understand because you're good at languages. But at the other end of the boat, you hear a Dutch couple speaking Dutch to themselves. What do? Do you go up to them and say, oh, komen jullie ook uit Nederland? Permanent, fascinerend, vertel. Who is that? No, you pretend to be British for the whole 2 hours so you don't have to talk to those people. That is how we ended up with Trump and Wilders.
That's true. Trump and Wilders and his Freedom Party. It's a funny kind of freedom, though, isn't it? You know, can I be an immigrant? No. Can I be a Muslim? No. Can I wear a headscarf? No. Freedom.
And the ironic thing is that if anyone could benefit from wearing a headscarf, it's Geert Wilders. I don't mean to hair shame him, but clearly he himself is ashamed of what's going on up there. What is he trying to cover up? Have you seen pictures of Geert Wilders as a young man? He's got Indonesian heritage. As a young man, he had dark, curly hair. But ever since he went into politics, it's nothing but hair dye. Do normal, dye your hair. What is he trying to cover up? Have to hide my dark roots. Minder, minder. What is that?
He's just a dude. He's just a dude, a populist from Venlo, down by the German border. Anyway, it's just geography. I don't know what you're groaning at. If our countries have populists that are weirdly similar, we certainly put them in power with processes that are totally different, right?
In America, you can go into a voting booth, you know, and it's very binary, you know. Like on election day, it's either this one or that one. You know, Democrat, Republican, floop, floop. That's the choice you get. It's very binary. It's very bipolar, yes? If America is bipolar, then in the Netherlands, you have multiple personality disorder. 17 million people, 17 million different political parties. Every time you open up a Dutch voting formulier, it's like floop, 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 floop. You're not even halfway done opening the whole thing. It's every single party from every single candidate in every single party. You know what it is like? It's like when you order at a Spanish restaurant from a tapas menu. It's like, ooh, I want to try a little bit of this one, and I'm curious about that one. And Volt, ooh, okay, I could try that one. No, you can only vote for one thing in the Dutch elections. It's the worst tapas restaurant ever.
Well, I'll tell you what, though, it's now when they're trying to sit down and actually make the coalition. Yeah. That, to me, that's when it's most like the tapas restaurant, right? Because that's when, no matter what you ordered, no matter what you really, really wanted, at the end of the day, you always end up stuck with something that you didn't order and you do not want at all.
No, and that is how we think politics, that's an example of how politics are being done incorrectly.
Right, that's true. I gotta say, your coalition process is weirdly, incorrectly difficult. I gotta say, in the States, our process of keeping the coalition together, especially on the left, can be tough.
Now, sorry, we're being confusing. In the Netherlands, we have coalitions, but in America, we're not known for building coalitions, really.
Well, I mean, no, but we have parties. We have two main parties,
yeah.
Right? But each party is basically a coalition of smaller parties. That's what they were talking about, keeping the coalition together, right?
Right.
The Democratic Party is a coalition. It's a permanent coalition. It never falls apart. Yeah. It's basically made of GroenLinks.
The Green Left.
Right, PvdA.
Labor Party.
And the TPV.
TPV?
The tattooed, pierced vegans.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yeah.
And they just stick together, right?
Yeah,
they just stick together. Republican Party, also a coalition of smaller parties. Greg, there's no need to translate this because some of these don't have a Dutch version.
It's like a new coalition.
It is a total new coalition. It's basically made of the low tax for rich people party, big oil, big business party, the gun nuts, the Christians, and the racists.
That's true, yeah. That's not.
And that's the party. And it's a weird coalition, right? I mean, the Democrats, you get it, right? Labor, socialists, they kind of fit together. But the Republican coalition is a mixed bag of nuts. You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine if you walked into a cocktail party? Here's what you would never do. You would never walk into the party and be like, oh, you're rich, you're Christian, I hate black people, let's hang out. Right? Well, that's exactly what they do. I don't know how they stick together. My theory is that they stick together. They're like one of those married couples that everybody knows they hate each other, and they say they're sticking together for the children, but you know that they're just staying together because they both want to, be there when the other one dies.
Oh, my God, yeah. Pep, I have no idea which marriage you're talking about. That could be anybody's marriage, okay. But here we are, it's Super Tuesday, and we have a majority of Democrats that seem to say they do want Joe Biden as their candidate. A majority of Republicans seem to want Trump as their candidate. So it's going to be Biden and Trump, even though the one thing that all Americans can agree on is they do not want Biden versus Trump in November, but that's exactly what we're gonna get.
Yeah, it's not even a sequel, it's one of those reboots. It's a Hollywood reboot.
Yeah.
Where you're watching and you're like, who asked for this?
Why?
And no one's excited. I mean, look at these guys. You look at Joe Biden, I mean, he doesn't even look like a person. He looks like a wax museum statue of Joe Biden, and it's already started to melt.
Donald Trump looks like he's wearing a Halloween mask of Donald Trump. Trump, of course, is running as the law and order candidate, which couldn't be more ironic. Like, if I win, there will be so many fewer criminals on the streets. One criminal specifically, because I plan to pardon myself. Not a joke.
No. He does find it. And you got to say, with all the, weird legal stuff coming out, it sure would be great if we could lean back, confident and secure that we have a qualified and not at all corrupt set of judges. But what we have is the Supreme Court. It's unfortunate.
There we go.
The Supreme Court slow-walking Donald Trump's immunity case to make sure the trial doesn't happen until after the election.
Trump now has to pay, a total of $454 million as a part of being indicted for his 91 state and federal crimes. Trump's rap sheet is getting so big, it's starting to look like a Dutch election ballot. I'm so glad that worked with you. Oh, that's great. But now Donald Trump is realizing, like for the first time ever, there's someone who's being in court as much as he is on the campaign trail. And he's making his court appearances into campaign appearances. So we were thinking he would never take the stand and testify, but now he needs the spotlight so he can brag about all the crimes that he did.
It is true. When Trump talks, again, you'd think he would plead the fifth and be quiet. It's like that old song from the 90s. Is it the 90s?
Yeah.
That Shaggy song, It Wasn't Me. Remember that song? But it's like the opposite version of that song. You know, it's like Trump's up there and it's like, I hear you did it in the shower.
That was me.
And then you did it on the counter.
Also me.
I heard you got real pushy.
And then I grabbed you by the meow. Yeah, that's so Trump. But after these court cases, we predict there will be two things that are happening. One, Trump is guilty, and two, he's free to go.
Yeah. See, the thing is, Greg and I, we're a little old-fashioned, right? We believe, and call us crazy, we believe that when you've committed a crime and they catch you, you should probably end up punished for the crime. Now, again, we're a little old-fashioned. You know, we both went to the same law school. And by that, I mean we watched a lot of Scooby-Doo cartoons growing up. Right, folks, remember Scooby-Doo? Right, Scooby-Doo with the original Shaggy. Scooby-Doo was the four teenagers and their dog, and they drove around in the mystery machine, and they'd solve crimes. And invariably, at the end of the show, when they'd solve the mystery, they would always pull the mask off the creepy, spooky ghost, and it wasn't a ghost. It was just some guy who always said,
I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for those meddling kids. You know? Yeah.
And in every one of the cases, right, all 91 indictments, the creepy, spooky ghost is Donald Trump.
Yeah. Trump is like, I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for those meddling kids.
Oh, sir, you're free to go.
Oh, I can go?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Fuck you, Scooby-Doo. Yeah, that's what we're getting now.
Right, because it turns out the arrest is only half the battle, right? You also need to convict. And, it turns out you also need to actually have a trial. That's a thing. Yeah. But you've got to convict. That's why law and order is law and order. That the law is just half. The order is also important. And if there was like a Scooby-Doo edition of Law and Order, I think it would look a little something like this.
Gung, gung. Your Honor, we were there on the Washington Mall on the 6th of January just doing some Scooby snacks and minding our own business and trying to chill out. But then all of a sudden, there were these big TV screens all over the National Mall with a scary orange man with a big orange face, and he was getting so mad and angry and yelling at everybody. It was so spooky. Right, Scoob? Indubitably. And it should be like that.
And the worst part is, that the judge would be like, well, you know what, we've got to throw this case out. We can't trust the testimony of these two witnesses. They're obviously stoned on Scooby snacks.
Zoinks! He's on to us! Run, Scoob!
Let's get out of here.
Pure! Yeah. That's why the system is broken. But anyway, so Super Tuesday will wrap up on this thought. Super Tuesday results, we still have a couple of questions to answer by tomorrow. One, will Trump finally force his only competition, Nikki Haley, right, to drop out of the race? Two, will Democrats keep showing up to vote for uncommitted to punish Joe Biden on Gaza? Or will they be like the New York academics who are just like voting, what does that change? Or C, will Biden's age continue to be the but her emails of 2024?
To be fair about Biden's age, the dude seems old, right? Like he seems as old as... I'm trying to think of something that's very, very old. He seems as old as Joe Biden.
Joe Biden, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's nothing older than that. And you can tell when he's talking. Like when he talks about Israel and Gaza, and it's an awful situation there. I like to think behind the scenes he's pushing for a ceasefire. I really do. But when he stands up and tells the world that the United States stands with Israel, no matter what he says, it just sounds Biden-ish. You know what I mean? When he gets up there and he's like, we stand on Israel. No, that didn't sound right. We stand up to Israel. No, we never do that.
I know, yeah. People think Joe Biden is losing it mentally. He can answer a question and sound like an intellectual guy who, is perfectly capable of communicating ideas. But as soon as he reads from the teleprompter, he looks lost. I think it might just be his eyesight. Has anyone had to read from a teleprompter for work? Like the newscasters on television. If your eyesight is really good, you could read a whole paragraph at a time. I'm getting older. I can read a couple sentences at a time right now. But yeah, I think Joe Biden, he's getting to the point where it's maybe a word at a time. Maybe they need to blow up the text so big it's like a letter at a time. Anytime Joe Biden successfully pronounces 3 syllables in a row, we should stop the speech and celebrate.
Right. I think at Thursday's State of the Union, we can expect to see something like, God bless you. No, sorry. God bless us. God bless USA. God bless the USA. Nailed it. God bless the USA.
Celebrate good times. Come on.
Oh,
that's our best hope for turning out the Democrat vote in November. Anyway, thank you so much for having us here tonight. Thank you, John Adams Institute.
We hope to see y'all, if you liked even a little of what you saw here, or you still have questions and want to see them answered, but in joke form, please come and see the show Politically Incorrect at Boom Chicago in October and the top of November.
Exactly. The book, of John Manusama is on sale in the front from Athenaeum Publishers, I believe.
And Greg is
from Athenaeum Bookstore from both publishers, yes. And excellent. I'm making it up as I go. The most important thing is beers are available, and we have one rule here. If you get us a drink, we will drink it. So, thank you so much. I'm Greg Shapiro.
I'm Pep Rosenfeld. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, John Adams Institute.